Hello, this is Liz Lawless, your host for Wild West Diversity, where we tell the rarely and untold stories of multicultural contributions to the settling of the American Wild West. Each Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, we'll be sharing a historical legend and a living legend. Someone from history and someone living that Western lifestyle today, keeping it alive for the future generation. We hope you'll join us on Thursday. If not, we'll see you on the trail. Hello, this is Liz Lawless, your host for Wild West Diversity, and we're just delighted today to be talking about episode 10. This is our 10th episode, and today we're talking all things Buffalo Soldiers. And I'm just delighted to have my guest here today, Sergeant Sam Allen. Sam has been doing some work with the Buffalo Soldiers for a period of time now, and so we're going to hear his story. How you doing today, Sam?
Hey, how are you, Liz? Everything's good.
Everything's good, for sure. So Sam and I have been knowing each other a long time. We've been in the rodeo business and the Buffalo Soldier business and the storytelling and the school presentation and living history, telling these rarely and untold stories of African Americans, Hispanic, Native Americans, and women, these stories that weren't told. And so we want to connect people to their heritage, don't we, Sam? So
yes, we do.
How did you get started in this Buffalo Soldier activity?
Well, short story. My brother actually started. He was a former Dallas police officer, and I was at Garland, Texas, and we both were community minded. He got started as a gang prevention program there while he was working the gang unit over at Dallas.
Right.
And I had a little money and a little bit more talent than he did, so I bought horses and all the other stuff we need to put the kids together. We actually grew up in West Dallas. So what we were trying to do is show those kids over in West Dallas there's another way of doing things. And if they wanted to join a gang, then let's join one that has some positive attributes, which was the Buffalo Soldier, one of the most bravest and honorable people in the whole United States Army.
Right, for sure. So
that's a short story.
The short story. Yeah, we'll talk some more about it. So basically in Texas, there is one cultural program that the Texas Parks and Wildlife puts on, and it's the Texas Buffalo Soldier program. And we have 18 Texas Buffalo Soldier kind of after school programs for kids. A couple of them are at the forts out in West Texas and San Antonio and Austin. Obviously here in Dallas, Fort Worth, we have 3 or 4 programs. And one of those programs is the program that Sam and his brother Paul Allen run. And they were always so kind to come out to the Cowboys of Color rodeos and share the Buffalo Soldier history, that military history, with our audiences. So let's play a little short promo here, and then we can talk a little bit more about some of these historical characters that you're telling the kids about today.
My name is Sam Allen, veteran police officer over 40 years, retired chief of police, college instructor, and a member of the North Texas Buffalo Soldiers. I'm currently employed as a community liaison officer in the city of Balch Springs, Texas. I'm here with Sheffet, an invocation, and the journey continues.
Okay, so that's great. So that's Sam there in his Buffalo Soldier uniform. And that's what living history is all about, isn't it, Sam? Tell us a little bit about what y'all do when you go out and do presentations for people, and go ahead and share with our audience and our people watching and listening, because this is also a podcast that gets pulled down later after we do the show. But tell them about some of the characters. There was really a Sergeant Sam Allen, wasn't there, that was a Buffalo Soldier?
To that, what we tried to do is find those individuals that were actually in the 19th and 24th Cavalries, and of course, cavalry and the foot soldiers. And we tried to take on that person's personality and everything else, from how many members he had in his family to how long he served in the military. And we try to keep that story straight. And let me back up just a little bit. I mentioned a guy's name about Sheffet. Sheffet is a producer out of New York City who filmed that clip you just showed.
Right.
So that film has been shown all over, including in some places that I've never heard of. But Anyway,
See, and that's a great
that's,
thing, and even with the pandemic, the opportunity for us to live stream and share video and Zoom and still tell these stories and share these stories with people is great. Because, like you say, we can share these stories all over the world.
that's the good thing about the technology we have available today. I'm sorry, Liz. What was the other question that you asked?
So who do you play? So when y'all do living history, when y'all go out to a school or a church or a community center or a city or a library or something like that, community center, do you just play a Buffalo Soldier in general, or do, like you say, you were talking about, take on a character? Is there somebody that you like particularly from history that you like to share his story?
Yeah, I take on the persona of a guy named Sam Allen. Sam Allen is actually from Tennessee. And Sam stayed in the military for over 20 years. And this guy, I kind of likened him to myself. So I could tell a story about him, and I'm telling a story about myself. I spent 45 years as a police officer and actually wound up as an assistant city manager over in Box Spring. But some of those things, I wasn't the most pleasant guy around. What I mean by, if I had a chore to do, or if I had a task to do or a goal to do, then let me do it, get out of my way. And sometimes it made me seem like some gruff guy that just don't want to be messed with. And it's just the way I was. You tell me what you need done, give me the time you need it done, and I'll get it done. And this Sergeant Sam Allen is basically the same way. He went up the ladder as a trooper, came back down the ladder as a trooper, made the rank as a sergeant. But every time they'd have a battle, guess who they called on to lead his platoon? Sergeant Sam Allen.
Yeah. For sure. And that was it. So after the Civil War, I guess what happened, for those of you listening, if you don't know the history, after the Civil War, they put in 4 infantry and 2 cavalry units, right? And so the cavalry is somebody that was on horseback. An infantryman was somebody on a foot soldier, basically, who was walking for the most part. And so they had African Americans, which later became Buffalo Soldiers. And we'll have Sam tell you why they have that name. But they, after the Civil War, they were enlisted to go west and do what's part of Manifest Destiny, because all of that territory west of the Mississippi was not states. It was territory. Like Oklahoma was a territory. There was Indian territory. And so for 10 years, they had Indian wars where the Buffalo Soldiers were leading a lot of those fights on the frontier. They were protecting settlers. They were building telegraphs and forts and all that kind of stuff, weren't they, Sam?
Yes. Oklahoma was one of the last territories that became part of the states. I think that was in 1907. But all the bad guys, all the cattle rustlers, wound up in Oklahoma because it was a safe haven for them. But when they was pushing the trails west, they needed someone to protect them from the rustlers and the cattle drivers, and actually would land telegraph posts too. So they brought on the 10th Cavalry, and the 10th Cavalry never let them down. They fought Indians, they fought bad, and I say Indian, they were actually Native Americans, and they fought the bad guys and all of that to make a safe passage for those that were in the construction work and those that were moving west. They even made it safe for Chisholm Trail Drive from Fort Worth all the way up to Kansas City. So those guys have a lot of history.
Yeah, for sure. And even today, Buffalo Soldier flags fly in the military in units all around the world, even though the rest of those units were actually, I guess, merged into the regular military and the regular army. But they still have their flags that fly, and there's still people like Sam and his brother and other people around the country telling these stories, because we want to share these stories not only with kids, especially so that they make that connection, but with adults as well. So there was a guy, wasn't there? There was a guy named that was a colonel right here that he made his way kind of up the list, and he basically had men that served under him, where a lot of the Buffalo Soldiers always had a white officer.
Well, there were several officers that finished West Point. Several. There was one in particular that had the roughest time. That guy's name was Flipper.
Right. Yeah.
Flipper was one of the first guys to finish. Flipper was a very, very intelligent man, but he had a rough time at the academy, like most people of color back in the day. But Flipper, he went through the whole academy.
Right.
Whipper was finally given his commission and assigned to a unit as a supply supervisor or supply commission officer.
Right.
And then they came up with this whole deal about him being a thief, stealing money from the commissary or something like that. But it all boiled down to he was dating a white woman, and they didn't like that, so they booted him out with an undesirable
with that same thing. Yeah, but he did. But he also was an engineer, and I know he did some water work, some stuff with water, and especially in desert and dry area and arid areas. And then the other one, so we've got Emmanuel Stance. We had Charles Young. I think that was Charles Young, actually, an early picture of Charles Young that we just had up a while ago. But he was also a colonel, and he actually was with the, he served over in the park department, didn't he? Over in the Grand Canyon, I think, eventually ended up.
Yellowstone.
Oh, at Yellowstone. Okay.
Yeah. Charles actually commanded several units there, and one of the biggest one was being the commander for the park police at Yellowstone Park. Is where he commanded the first, I guess you would call them police or safety officers for Yellowstone Park were the Buffalo Soldiers, and that's the real duty was to keep it safe there and make sure that the bears and the Native Americans didn't overrun the place over, and they did that. But Charles Young was the first to either command a whole unit as a person of color.
Right. Yeah. So very interesting history, all across the country, all across the western states for sure. Wonderful picture of Sam and his.
Where'd you find that one?
Maybe I can find everything. And so, it's a great history. It's a great legacy. It's an honorable legacy. And, it's a story that hadn't been told very much. And so, that's why we go out. That's why, we love the rodeos, because we got access to a large group of people at one time. We love to go out and talk to a school, but when you go out and talk to a school, maybe you see 200 or 300 kids.
Yeah.
At the rodeo, we maybe have 4,000 or 5,000 people, coming through, and are they all stunned, Sam? What do people say to you when they come up and they see you in uniform?
Well, they want to know about. Actually, they say, "Gosh, is that a Civil War uniform?" And of course, the answer to that is no. The Buffalo Soldiers came after the Civil War, but I always tell them that some of these same guys that were in the 9th, 10th, 24th, and 27th they actually fought in the Civil War. Some of them fought on the southern side, and then when the war was over with, they I won't say they liked it so much, but it was a steady job, and like they said, that amounted to most of the time 3 meals on a cot. And again, times are hard for everyone back in the day, especially on jobs. But the military offered a job and steady pay. Now, these guys, the Buffalo Soldiers, will sometimes get less money. And usually the commanding officer that was able to command one of those units made sure that they got treated properly, because they knew that these guys were some guys with integrity and with honor, and they loved that blue uniform and they loved this country.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, anyway, you can see this show here. You can see any of our previous shows at wildwestdiversity.com. On YouTube, we're running on LinkedIn and Facebook. If you're on there and you happen to see this, you can comment in the comments in the chat. But Sam, why don't you tell us a little bit about how the Buffalo Soldiers got their name? I'm not sure if that's in the video or not. So let's go ahead and tell people about that.
Okay. And they can go on my webpage too, the North Texas Buffalo Soldiers Unit. And there's a little information there. But there was a unit actually called, and they fought as scouts for the Union Army. And these guys were actually buffalo hunters. They wore the jackets and all that, but most of these guys were, like you said, were hunters. They went out there and they hunted the buffalo, and usually the meat was used to feed the military. And then after the Civil War, we had those individuals that were recruited to the military, and all of these individuals, except for the commanding officer, were black. So when our first encounter with the Native Americans were that, hey man, these guys will fight you.
Right.
They will fight you to the end of death. And that wasn't the first time. And some of the story history books said this was the first time that they saw black people, and that's not true. as the Buffalo Soldiers lived with the Native Americans and became part of the Native. They were even a part of the Trail of Tears. So that's another story. Anyway, so you know how story goes. Sometimes they're larger than life.
Right.
And the story kept going around and going around. But one of the stories that they do tell about was this soldier that was, and you know, everybody had to do patrol. And one of the main things that they needed, and everybody, the Native American needed, so did the military, was horses. So these guys came through and they stole some horses from the soldiers that was out scouting. And this guy knew that if he lost those horses, then somebody was going to have to walk, and it wasn't going to be him. So he wanted to get these horses back. So he actually went and attacked that band of Native Americans, got those horses back, and then they turned around and they pursued him. The story goes he had an arrow in his leg, an arrow in his side, an arrow in his back, and an arrow on his horse, that the horse had become limp. So somehow he jumped off the horse, went under the trestle there with all these arrows sticking out of him, and he was firing back until help came along. And when help came along, of course, the guys, the Native Americans, ran away. And then the story even got bigger. He said, this guy that had hair like wool on his neck like the wool of a buffalo, we shot him and we shot him and we shot him. He didn't die. Just like the buffalo. If you didn't get the buffalo and kill him, he'd get up and attack you.
Right.
And that's how the Buffalo Soldier story became worldwide.
Right, the name for sure. So yeah, and so there were
actually buffaloes, and before, if you were gonna get away from him, you had to kill him.
Right, right. So it was about that valor, and actually there were 18 medals of honor given to Buffalo soldiers during.
They weren't given; they earned them.
Earned them. Well, that's true, but they, were honored. I guess there were 18 men that were honored. And most of it was for not leaving the field of battle. You know, like you say, Benjamin Brown, he was shot up 4 or 5 times in the stomach, in the arm, in the leg, and Emmanuel Stantz. And, these guys, were protecting the payroll, I think. And I think this time they actually did get away with the gold or the payroll or whatever it was, the coins or whatever they had. But one of them crawled, a mile to a farmhouse to get help, because they were overrun, they were attacked by bandits, and it was a small unit. But all of these guys, like you say, they were proud to be there. They fought hard, and it was a job. And even though like you say, it wasn't, they didn't always get the best equipment. They didn't always get the best horses, but they made the best of what they had. And they were used to doing things. They were used to making their own tools. They were used to making their own ropes and other things out of materials and things like that. And so it's a proud legacy. It's a legacy that we want to tell people. I think we do have another video where you share some stories about Buffalo soldiers and some of the things. So why don't we go ahead and watch that, and then we'll come back and follow up and wrap up.
Okay.
People need to know about the Buffalo Soldiers because that was part of our history. That was part of our U.S. history, and also it's part of, most important, part of our military history. Is that after the Civil War, we had to put the states back together. We had to put the people back to work. We had to put people back to building. We had to put our children back in school. But we still had a lot of chaos throughout the land. So Congress put together these troops to go out and make this country safe again, and to start them building and start them moving westward. The North Texas Buffalo Soldiers unit is about keeping that part of our history alive. There's not a whole bunch written about the significance that the Buffalo Soldiers played in the United States, so we're just trying to keep that part of the history alive so that we can pass that information on to show that how much everybody played in resettling this country. To me, the most important lesson that the Buffalo Soldiers can teach to the youngsters today is diversity. And that is that we had a group of soldiers. They actually was coined as the colored soldiers. The Native Americans gave us the name of Buffalo Soldiers. But what they were able to do was to put together people and learn from each other. Learn that differences sometimes meant it made things better. They learned from the Native Americans on how to catch horses, train horses. They learned from the Native Americans how to live off the land. They learned from the Hispanic on parts of their culture how to survive in the heats of the plains of Texas and California. They learn how to use nature as part of what they need to do to survive. They also learn the language in order to be able to communicate with the vast majority of what a Spanish speaker and Native American tongue, which were over 27 dialects, I believe. I'm a career police officer, and about 15 years ago, my brother and I thought that instead of continually putting people in jail, especially our young folks, we need to be able to give them another outreach. We need to be able to tell them that things aren't as bad as they think it is. So we tell them the history of the Buffalo Soldiers, how these guys up from slavery had no concept of anything beyond the plantation, how they didn't know how to read or write or add or subtract. And we showed them the hardships of these individuals, and then we taught them how they learn and the importance of learning. That was always something that they look forward to, and I meant what they look forward to is that if they're most trained, the toughest one of their officers were always the Native American, and actually that's how the Buffalo Soldiers got their name. They fought with each other, and they had sort of a love-hate for each other. In fact, it turned into a pride. The Native Americans' most prized animal was the buffalo. The buffalo meant just about everything to them. It was shelter for them. They took the hides and they tended for them. It was food, of course, for them. They even took the innards of that animal and made strings for their bows. They used the hooves. They even used the urine for medicine. And they also took the dung from the animal, and they, in some parts, used that dung to cook their foods with. So it was very important to them. And they knew what an effort it was to take that animal down. So when they shot that animal, they usually had to get up close enough to that animal just to kill that animal and keep that animal from fighting. And they found the same type of tenacity with the colored soldiers when they fought them. So some folks said they gave them the name because of the wool of the hair, or the hair on the top of our heads. But I've been black all my life, and I never had hair like the buffalo. And I don't know very many of the people that look like me that have wool like the buffalo. But what the Native Americans said to us was that if you ever got entangled with one of these guys, the colored soldiers, it would be like fighting a buffalo. You had to kill him to stop him. And that's how they got the name Buffalo Soldiers.
So that's so fun. Yeah, so that's fun there. So that's some of that history that we like to share. And so I appreciate you coming on today, Sam, so much and talking about that. Yeah, what do y'all do? Y'all go out and talk to schools, you talk to churches. The program with the youth is kind of like they have to do certain things, don't they? They got to stay out of trouble to be able to wear the uniform and to be around the horses. I think animals are a really key part of it, don't you? Because
in fact, I know it is for those kids. Once they understand that they can control the horse either by simple commands or by leading them or by showing the horse who is the master of this, then they can control their own situation and their own lives.
Right. So they want to come back, and so they do better. They want to be around the horses. They want to be around these men that are role models for them, from the North Texas Buffalo Soldiers and our other Buffalo Soldiers across the state. There are Buffalo Soldiers in, like you say, in Oklahoma and Colorado and Wyoming and in the northern states. And so we appreciate that. And we want to tell this history because a lot of people just don't know about these stories and about these men. And so that's why, I wrote the book Western Legends, and there are a number of Buffalo Soldiers there, like you say, because this was a solid job. We talked in the previous show about Kathy Williams, the only documented female Buffalo Soldier, who obviously one of our members portrays her, Lee Reed, who's a great storyteller and is she part of the North Texas Buffalo Soldiers, or she runs Lakeside kind of over in Fort Worth, doesn't she?
Yeah, but she's part of the North Texas Buffalo Soldiers, and then we have the Buffalo Soldiers Association, which we're all part of. Right,
which is a larger association. I think she was the first woman president too, wasn't she?
That is true.
Of the Buffalo Soldier Association. So if you've got kids or you want to know about this history, you can go to North Texas Buffalo Soldiers. You can go to Wild West Diversity. You can find some of those films. You can check out our books. If you come to the rodeo's in Fort Worth, maybe the rodeo in Dallas. Oklahoma City's coming up here in May, the first week of May, actually next week on the 7th, May the 7th, 2 weeks from now, I guess. They'll be in Oklahoma City, and you can see some of these guys participating. The cavalry guys, they ride in the grand entry. They're in their uniforms. They set up their tents. They set up their artifacts and things like that, so that the kids can see and actually see what it was like to live back then. Because y'all didn't have you didn't have a cabin or a house or any of that kind of stuff, did they? Tell us a little bit before we leave here, what it was like what kind of equipment did the Buffalo Soldier do? And what did they have to do? Like the infantry had to walk how many miles, and they had to carry all their stuff, didn't they?
The infantry
they had to pack their stuff.
The infantry had to walk everywhere, but it wasn't an easy life. The cavalry had a little bit better because they were on the horses, but the life wasn't as bad. In fact, for some of those guys, it was actually better than living the life that they had. This was, again, after the Civil War. Most of these guys had spent time as slaves, and the slaves were living under deplorable conditions. So they saw this as an opportunity to have something a little bit better. And in those units, most of those units, especially the cavalry unit, because they had a little bit more time for downtime than the infantry. There, they learned how to read and they learned how to write. And the most important part of that, Liz, go ahead.
It was the chaplain, wasn't it, that taught a lot of the men? There was usually a chaplain that was assigned.
The most important part of that, they used that Bible to learn how to read. One soldier that could read would read a passage. And then once you read that passage, you'd pass it on to the next one. And that person either remembered that passage or you'd actually pick up on some of the words. And the chaplain was one of the most important people that they put into the military because they believed that these young soldiers they were all savages and didn't have any idea who God was or the part about religion. And in most of in reality, religion and Christianity, as we know, came from the country of Africa, where they only worship one God. But again, they didn't take time to learn this. But these guys, they picked up even though they couldn't read, they picked up most of this information from that chaplain who sit there and taught them about the Bible and used that Bible to teach them how to read.
Right. And then I guess playing cards? They used playing cards, I think, to learn mathematics and subtraction, or was it? If
you had the duty, that night duty to guard the camp, and one of the things, like I was telling you, one of the most important things to a cavalryman was the horse. Yeah. And those Native Americans could walk up on you, take your horse, and you never know it till it's gone. So they had to count the number of horses they had. They did this by using pebbles. So if you had one pebble for each horse, and in the morning when your shift was over with, you take those pebbles and it's supposed to match that horse, so you learn how to add and subtract by those pebbles. So they used that to teach them math.
Right.
The directional goals, they did the same thing. And so trying to, by watching their moths to grow on the back, and then they would listen to the Native Americans on how to find water and how to find food in the desert. So they learn, and they learn quickly.
Right. We're good at adapting to, the different situations too, like you say, and the environment, things like that. So, and then I guess if they retired, did they get land? Is that right? Did I understand that right?
That was a plan, but the Jim Crow law broke all that up.
Okay, so they really didn't, but they were glad to serve, like you say. These men were glad to serve. They were glad to have a job, like you say, for and what pay they could get. And sometimes the pay would be months before you got paid. It's not like they got paid every 2 weeks. It's like you say, they had to have a gold or coin, come in, and then they distribute it and things like that. And so there were always bandits trying to steal everything and other things. But that's why they built the forts. So they built that fort system across the country, and especially Texas, because a lot of people came into Galveston Island after the Civil War, and then they moved across west to California because they were trying to avoid the winter.
Right.
You know, and so and all of those, like you say, the Buffalo Soldiers were a huge part of that here in Texas and Kansas and I guess Arkansas, New Mexico, and what we know now is New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona. So, you know, we really appreciate that history. If you're watching today or if you catch this video on a recording, we'll hope you'll come back and watch some of the other editions. This is our 10th episode. So we've talked about rodeo. Last week we had an artist, an Asian artist on who paints rodeo and Western scenes and cowboys because he had a friend that lived down in South Texas that was a part of the State Department when he lived in South Africa for 30 years. So we had Lapno on last week, and in a couple of weeks from now, we'll have Wild Bill's Western Wear. So we'll be talking about boots and boot making and jewelry making and hats and all of that kind of stuff. So we hope when you come to Wild West Diversity that you hear these different stories. And if you want to do something related to that Western lifestyle and you want to learn more, you need to read, don't you, Sam? You need to research.
You need to learn to read. That's one of the most important things that they thought that they needed and actually did, is to learn how to read and learn how to add and subtract.
Right. And so, you know, you can research this. There's, like you say, in some cases, there's not a lot of great good information that's easy to find. You really kind of have to look for it. The good thing about the military is they kept good records. So if you ever have a chance to go, to Washington, D.C. or somewhere like that, you want to visit those museums, you want to go to those places where you can see some of this history, and that history is visible. If you come to Texas, we want you to be looking for the North Texas Buffalo Soldiers. We want you to look for Wild West Diversity or Cowboys of Color Rodeos. And you're going to hear about these people, these individuals who, because of their choices and their actions, they lived really extraordinary lives in really difficult times. And so I think they're great role models today. Don't you, Sam, the Buffalo Soldiers?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, you have a couple of books that give you a brief rundown of just about everything you want to know about the diversity of the West and also about the Buffalo Soldiers, along with those women that were part of the growth of the especially Texas and the United States. Right,
for sure. So, well, Sam, I thank you so much for coming on the show today. Obviously, we could talk for 2 or 3 more hours, but we only have 30 minutes here for the show. But we want you to check out Sam and them. You can do Sam Allen, Buffalo Soldier, and there are probably a number of other videos of Sam. Before we end, what's the other character that you like to tell people about? Sam, go ahead and share that with us too, would you?
Well, because I was in law enforcement for a long time, Bass Reeves. And that's one of the most interesting characters you'll ever run across. He was one of the only he was the only black U.S. Deputy Marshal west of the Mississippi. Now, they had other deputy marshals, but the only one west of the Mississippi. And this guy was one of the most honorable men you could find and one of the best law enforcement officers you could find. Actually, he got rich doing what he was doing. Now, they don't talk about that a whole bunch, but he arrested over 3,000. Well, he arrested over 3,000 men, bad guys. Yeah. All of them were bad guys. And for each one of those men, there was a bounty for him. And that's how he became rich on him. He was a deputy U.S. Marshal for Judge Isaac Parker. And Parker was better known as the hanging judge. Yeah. It was so good that when they heard that Bass Reeves was coming out to arrest him, a couple of those guys, I mean, you're talking about real bad guys, would give themselves up. And they said, I'd rather give myself up to you than for you to bring me in. That's
And you talked about him being, honorable. I think he actually even arrested his son, didn't he?
He did at that. His son killed his wife. His son's wife. For whatever reason, she got angry, they said, because she was having an affair. But again, there was not a whole bunch of information. There was a reason for him to kill his wife. I think his name was Benji. Anyway, he killed him and took off. And Bass was coming back from his long hunts from looking at criminals. And this warrant was laying on his desk. None of the other 200 marshals would pick it up because that was Bass Reeves' son. Now, here's another important thing about Bass Reeves. He could not read.
Oh,
He cannot read or write in the English language. But you gave him a warrant, told him who that warrant was for, give him the description of that warrant, he memorized it. Now, he could speak 4 different dialects of the Native American tongue, but he couldn't read. Right. He could read every sign. He could tell you which way that horse traveled, how many people were traveling on that horse, which way that horse went, but he couldn't read. This is bad food.
But he was a great scout, and he had lived with the Indians too in the early days, hadn't he? After he'd escaped from, I guess he was a slave originally, and then during the war maybe worked, but got away or escaped and moved into the Indian territory and lived, and so that's why he kind of knew about him too. And
actually, he beat up his slave owner.
Had a fight with him, and ran and left to escape from that. Okay, that makes sense.
And then after the war, he they actually Judge Parker looked for him after they found out what he was doing about his tracking over here and being a scout for the U.S. Army.
Right.
He was also a Confederate soldier.
Oh, okay.
Is that important? Yeah. Absolutely, because that's part of his history.
Right. Well, and then that's the thing. We've got to tell our history, because if we don't, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, and if people assume that there is no past, I mean, we got to be able to talk about those things, and we got to share our stories, because a lot of people have stories. Everybody has some kind of story and a heritage, and most of the time it's a mixed heritage. We're all benefiting either through food or music or language or art or furniture or land, whatever it is.
We're all connected in one way or the other.
Yeah, we really are. And so I appreciate you so much, Sam, coming on the show today and talking about the Buffalo Soldiers and sharing those stories about Sergeant Sam Allen and Charles Young and Flipper. Mr. Flipper, he was the first one to graduate from West Point. Like you say, these other Black soldiers also graduated from West Point, and it was difficult for them. They weren't, they were mistreated, I'm sure, in multiple ways, but they stuck it out and they stayed with it, and because they wanted to wear the uniform, and they were proud, like you say, to serve their country. So thank you, and we thank you for your service, your law enforcement service, all these years, and especially your work with kids too. That you have a heart for young people and helping them find the right path, because it only takes one bad decision, to affect the rest of your life. And so
that's so true, and that's the message we try to put out also.
Yeah, so for sure. So if there's one last thing you want to share with our audience, Sam, what would it be?
We're all connected in one way or the other. Okay. So let's treat each other with respect.
Great. Right. That's right. So treat all of it with respect and treat somebody how you'd want to be treated, for sure, too. So, well, this is Liz Lawless, your host for Wild West Diversity. We appreciate you listening and watching today. You can come back anytime and see these recordings. We're here on Thursdays, every Thursday at 5 o'clock from 5 to 5:30. Hopefully you'll join us here. And if you don't, we'll see you on the trail. Bye. Hello, this is Liz Lawless, your host for Wild West Diversity, where we tell the rarely and untold stories of multicultural contributions to the settling of the American Wild West. Each Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, we'll be sharing a historical legend and a living legend. Someone from history and someone living that Western lifestyle today, keeping it alive for the future generation. We hope you'll join us on Thursday. If not, we'll see you on the trail.